This briefing focuses on Vietnam. The goal of this presentation is to inform you on the various aspects of that country in preparation for your upcoming investment decision. There are many aspects of a country that may be relevant to potential investment decisions, and the various languages of a country is the first of such issues. Similarities and differences in languages can have a substantial impact on a firm's ability to communicate with local customers, suppliers, and even employees. While Australia and Vietnam have distinctly different dominant languages, it's also true that the use of the English language in Vietnam is growing rapidly. And indeed, English study is now obligatory in many schools in Vietnam. It's also true that Vietnamese is the main language spoken at home in Australia for approximately 200,000 people, and this is growing rapidly as the number of Vietnamese immigrants increases. A second issue which can influence a firm's ability to conduct business in a foreign country is the dominant religion. Religion has a potentially powerful impact on people's value systems and can influence how they behave and interact with one another. While Australia and Vietnam differ in terms of their dominant religions, Christianity and Buddhism respectively, they are remarkably similar in terms of their degree of religiosity, with only 24% of people in Vietnam indicating that religion is very important in their lives. The two countries are also similar in terms of the diversity of religions practiced and tolerated within each country. Moreover, while Protestantism is still a minor denomination in Vietnam, the growth in the number of believers has been as much as 600% over the last 10 years. A third factor which may influence a company's ability to conduct business in a foreign country is the level of industrial development. This not only influences the cost of labor in a country and the consumption patterns, but it also arguably shapes the attitudes, values, and behaviors of the population in general. Despite the obvious differences between Australia and Vietnam in terms of economic and industrial development, there are many similarities as well, and the differences are diminishing rapidly. In the major cities of Vietnam, the standard of living is quickly rising, and Western consumer goods are widely available. In fact, the richest Vietnamese consume goods in a pattern similar to Australians. A fourth important issue is the similarities and/or differences in the educational systems of countries. Despite perceptions to the contrary, Australia and Vietnam share many common aspects of their education systems. In fact, even though Vietnam is a developing country and its education system faces many challenges, its literacy rate is actually higher than Australia's. Like Australia, Vietnam's education system is primarily state-funded, but a number of private institutions is growing rapidly. The Vietnamese system includes a large number of specialist colleges established to develop a diverse and skilled workforce. Again, similar to Australia, entry into higher education is highly competitive, with students sitting entrance exams to gain access to universities. A fifth critical issue with respect to doing business in another country is similarities and/or differences in the legal and political systems. As a single-party communist state, there are obviously substantial differences between Australia and Vietnam in terms of their political and legal systems. However, it is important to note that Vietnam is becoming increasingly capitalist. According to The Economist magazine, Vietnam is currently run by ardent capitalist communists. As in Australia, the Prime Minister of Vietnam is the head of the government, presiding over a council of ministers derived from an elected National Assembly. The National Assembly is superior to both the executive and the judicial branches, with the Supreme Court being the highest court of appeal in the nation. Similarly, both countries have constitutional provisions for human rights. A sixth but potentially more subtle issue is similarities and/or differences in actual business practices. This can involve simple but potentially embarrassing issues, such as how to properly greet people and attitudes towards time. Vietnamese business practices are becoming increasingly more Western. For example, the bow has been replaced by the handshake, which is now the most common form of greeting. Punctuality is also expected, especially for business meetings. If invited to a Vietnamese person's house, it is typical to bring a small gift. While flowers are not common, soaps, picture frames, or toys for the children are. Lastly, the spoken word is very important. As in Australia, verbal commitments are binding and should not be made lightly. The seventh and final issue is the broader set of cultural values which are commonly shared by a large portion of a country's population. Countries can vary in terms of the emphasis placed on individuality versus conformity, the attitudes towards uncertainty and ambiguity, the attitudes towards authority and social inequities, and not least, attitudes towards how gender roles are allocated in society. While Vietnam and Australia have different cultural values, Vietnam is going through rapid development. This has led to an increasing cultural similarity as Vietnam becomes more westernized. It is especially true in terms of views regarding gender roles and interactions between the genders. There are also generational differences in cultural values. Younger Vietnamese are more westernized than previous generations, and Australians may find stronger cultural fit with younger managers and employees. This concludes our brief presentation on Vietnam.